Hello, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. And tonight, it's my great pleasure to welcome back our good friend, Professor Daryl Hamamoto. Professor Hamamoto, the professor of cultural forensics, and a guy that I just love to talk to, and I can't wait to get started. So, welcome, Professor.
Thank you, John. It's great to be back with you again this month with you and your incredible audience. It's a period
Thank
of transition. We're all feeling the intensity mounting day by day. And your shows of recent have been reflecting that energy. And I think it's all going to accumulate starting now around the Beltane season. You know?
Okay. And Beltane, explain what that is for people that are not familiar with the word.
Okay, well, this is part of, as you well know, part of your Celtic heritage, but there's been a resurgence of what's called, by the scholars of religion, of neo-paganism. I don't call it neo, I think it's always been here, especially since the 1960s, and it has different manifestations, but it originates in what is now known as Scotland, up northern British Isles, probably migrated to the British Isles from what are called the Vikings, right? The people that settled there, the pagan area, and it's enjoyed a worldwide resurgence. And I'm making the argument that this form of paganism is integral to the foundations of the American higher education systems, the colleges and the university, including your alma mater, the College of William and Mary, and more recently, the University of California, Stanford University, and they are all based on this idea of a primordial androgyny, right? The melding together of the sacred feminine and the male, and of course,
Oh, wait a minute. You're losing me there now. Sacred androgyny. I'm not a, I don't associate that with the Celtic tradition of Beltane anyway. Maybe you could
Mhm.
fill me in on that.
Primordial androgyny. Yeah, the Beltane is, as you know, is a fertility um, ritual,
Exactly. Yeah.
a fertility. They have the maypole, and the women decorated with gaily colored ribbons, and they dance around the maypole. And you know what the maypole stands for, right?
I think I can guess.
Okay, all right. And those ideas migrated to the so-called New World, which were settled, by the way before Columbus by these self-same Celtic peoples. We know this by now. This is the new history that's being rewritten as we speak, and they name certain sacred place names like Mary Mount. It's not like Marymount. It's like Mary in a very crude sense of Mary.
Oh, you don't think that
Mary.
Catholics would put up a double entendre in the name Mary Mount? Oh, Professor.
Well, these pre-colonial people, they're portrayed as being upstanding and God-fearing, and they wear black and white and wear buckles on their shoes and have the hats, but they're pretty wild. And the wilder of the two genders of the time were, if you want to look at it objectively, were the women.
Oh, come on now. The
Yeah.
women,
Oh my
the women
gosh.
stayed home and they stirred that pot, that hangs over the fireplace, and and they scold the children, and
Right.
women are harmless. Come on, Professor.
Yeah, and in that pot are the frogs and the snakes and the venom, and there's 3 of them around there saying, "Oh,
Trouble, trouble,
Macbeth."
boil and bubble.
So, and I know
But
it would
you
be
got
impop
come on now. You got to get back to this androgyny thing there, because you're telling me that Beltane, which is really the time when the young men and the young, there so many great old songs like, young women, they run like hares on the mountain. Young
Mhm.
women, they run like hares on the mountain. And if I was a young man, I'd sure go a hunting with me fall down the day, oh, with me fall down the day. There's that one, and then there's
Oh, yeah.
the uh, will you go, lassie, go to pull wild mountain thyme all around the bloomin' heather. Will you go, lassie, go? Will you go up in the mountain with me and we'll lay down and make a bower and we'll strew the flowers of the mountain all around you and you'll lay down there and you and I, well, you know what's going to happen next, right? So
Right.
this is the fertility and the ultimate
Yes.
expression of male and female. So where do
The
you get?
coming together, yes, of equality. So this is,
Oh,
it's
so
part
it's
of
not.
your ancestral memory. All these songs, these tunes are just coming
Yeah.
out. But look at from the point of view, who was the one being desired? Who's the one that's being pursued? Who's the one being put on the pedestal? It's the sacred feminine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
The
no doubt.
man realizes that he is nothing without that. And of course, at the sacred feminine. And of course, that's exactly what's being attacked with the whole transsexual agenda of the present. And it's being done through this legacy of occultism that I think started with the Second Great Awakening in America. And this is going on just prior to the Great they call it the American Civil War. I call it the American Auto Genocide. 1840s through past the Civil War time, you have the Second Great Awakening, and you have a lot of men from in leadership positions who perished, and young men as well. A whole generational leadership wiped out, and this allowed a lot of women like Jane Stanford and Apperson Hearst, right, the founder of Stanford University, co-founder, and one of the most important benefactors of the University of California, Phoebe Hearst, allowed them positions of prominence, and they were very much involved with spiritualism or spiritism in the late 19th century, in particular early 20th century, and that laid the groundwork for modern day feminism. It has these occult roots. One person says they're Gnostic. I don't want to confuse them, and I'll just say occult. And then there's this book I received recently. It was published way back in 1989 by a self-proclaimed feminist named Anne Browdy. It's called Radical Spirits, subtitled Spiritualism and Women's Rights in the 19th Century America. Right. So from an academic perspective, which is from where I hail, there's this body of literature that underscores or supports my seemingly bizarro world contention that what we're seeing here is the end game of this pagan or neo-pagan concept, because both Jane Stanford and Phoebe Hearst were spiritualists. They were not Christians. They feel that they had transcended Christianity, and a lot of it, as we've talked before, was conditioned by Madame Blavatsky, who not coincidentally hails from Ukraine, right?
That's
Her
right.
family, her people there, and who disseminated this post-Christian um, ideology in the guise of a religion, which is still very strong and has its headquarters, not coincidentally, in Santa Barbara, where all these individuals are currently migrating to. For what reasons? For the apocalypse? I don't know. Here's another book by probably a pagan himself. I'm just going by his name, Per Faxneld. I don't know if that's his real name or not. It sounds Nordic, Saxon, but it's called Satanic Feminism, Lucifer as the Liberator of Women in 19th Century Culture. All right.
Mhm.
So what we're seeing today has a over 100-year genesis, but now it's being made possible through the new bioeconomy that's been put in place since the end of World War II. And that's where body parts, blood in particular, and which also has ritualistic significance. I don't know if there's going to be any mass bloodletting on Beltane, May 1st, 2013, but don't be surprised if we see some sort of sacrificial celebrity or a sacrifice of some large celebrity to get our energy and our attention between that period of Beltane right now. We're just entering it. It's the 28th or 27th, say from the 28th through May 2nd. Keep your eyes open and your phones ready, because there might be something significant here. I myself am going to be doing, prior to Beltane itself, a comprehensive revisiting, and I know it's a cliche, it's a YouTube cliche about the connection between Anton LaVey, who had the Church of Satan in San Francisco, and his relationship with one Jane Mansfield, who was a parody of the sacred feminine. She, like Mae West, was a, she was following the footsteps of all the platinum blonde heroines in the 1930s and 40s that she grew up with. And she was in competition with Marilyn Monroe, right? The platinum blondes. But she was mocking, and this is what people didn't really understand about Jane Mansfield, that it was a put on. She had an IQ, John, of 163. She had been to college. She never got a degree, but she'd been to Southern Methodist University, University of Texas, and she knew fairly well 5 different languages in addition to, she was a brilliant woman, but she played this little cliche in order to reach stardom. But in order to do that, she probably had to make a deal with the devil. And by the way, in some of the standard biographies like this, in order to protect her image, there's a denial that she herself was a Satanist. But I got a book in the mail the other day called California Infernal, and it is just chock full of portraits by a German paparazzo of the 1950s. His name is Walter Fischer, who was stationed in Hollywood to syndicate all these photos that we know, including the one where Sophia Loren is giving the side eye to Jane Mansfield. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
She's going, oh my gosh, I feel
Well,
like a Fiat, and here I'm looking at an American Cadillac.
at that time it was the bombshell era, right? And so the women that had the most hefty up
Yeah.
front were the ones that got the press, and that was Jane Mansfield's thing, was to just let those shoulder straps fall down, and let the press boys have a ball.
Exactly.
That happened,
That was Walter
and
Fischer.
but I love that.
Walter Fischer took that
I was going to
photograph.
say,
He also took a lot of photographs in the famed, notorious Black House, where Anton LaVey had his rituals, his lectures, his seminars, and his orgies, featuring the sacred feminine, beautiful women on his altar of sacrifice. And it is captured by Walter Fischer in this book.
when
So
you
I
said
felt
women on his altar of sacrifice, I think we can think of that literally in a way, because the submission of a woman to a devil-like figure like that is kind of a self-sacrifice, and it does put them in a very vulnerable position. And I think bad things do happen once they get put into that that position of being compromised. They're compromised for life, and they're exploited. And just like taking those photographs of Jane Mansfield for the purpose of selling ink.
Mhm. Well, yeah, absolutely. And of course, it was popularizing Satanism to the masses. Before that, it had been fairly much underground, but because of the counterculture, a lot of heterodox ideas were allowed to float to the top, and Anton LaVey exploited that. In the same time, Jane Mansfield's career was beginning to take a dip, was beginning to go downhill. She was all of 32 years old and already washed up, right?
Mm.
But the problem is that her manager and lover had a falling out with Anton LaVey. And at the Black House in San Francisco, he handled, this is according to this one book here, handled some of the artifacts that LaVey had warned him not to touch. These are sacred objects. They are not to be trifled with. These are not toys. And he violated, in contempt of Anton Lee, he violated that request. And within 18 days, both her manager, Sam Bronfeld, I think his name is, and Jane Mansfield were dead. They hit the end of a tractor trailer. Most people know the story already. They hit the end of a tractor trailer when they were leaving a nightclub performance in Biloxi, Mississippi, of all places, at 80 miles an hour, and they were nearly decapitated. And there's all these gory photos that are out there. The first one I saw was in a book called Hollywood Babylon that was done by our friend Kenneth Anger, who also writes the introduction to this book here. So she has been pretty much a figure of adoration for this subset of occultists and maybe Wiccans, more specifically, or occultists or neo-pagans for a long, long while. And I think as of May 1st, 2013, Beltane, they might be ready to make their move on a overt level. We've been giving a lot of signs. We've been giving a lot of distractions, like transvestite story hour. A lot of flack's been thrown. A lot of indie media. Your Stu Peters, your Ben Shapiro, your Dan Bongino, who, by the way, was recently let go from was it Fox or one of those shows, right? There's been a kind of a removal of this some stratum of these repeat casters, people like the Hangout, what's his name, Mr. Bowtie, second generation. You've been talking about Mockingbird Media recently, right? He's gone.
Oh, you mean Tucker?
Tucker Carlson, yeah, he's gone now, and also Don Lemonhead, he's gone.
Yeah.
And at the next tier, you got Don Bongino, who was one of these pop-up pundits who mainstream media was trying to insert in order to take away energy from organic alternative media. So we're seeing a lot of shuffling around, a lot of cosmic movement happening in the run-up to Beltane 2013. All right. So I asked your audience to join me. I don't really announce when I'm going to be doing it, because when I'm finished doing the research, I do a live stream. I find I can escape the censorious control of TubeView a lot easier that way, rather than have something regularly scheduled, Tuesday, Thursday, and also staying away from the topic of the Harry and Meghan reality show. Right, that's where was getting my strikes. Yeah, that's off limits. That's off limits. So we're going to go with Jane Mansfield, because a lot of the insights that I'm going to bring to that talk will apply to, again, another one of these sacred feminine persons who's being pushed to the front. In this case, to diminish the British monarchy, or at least one of its heirs. He's not the heir, he's the spare, right? That's the title of his own autobiography. We're talking about the British Prince Harry. It's called The Spare. And his brother, of course, is the heir.
But let me ask you though, when we speak of the feminine, the divine feminine, and we use a Marilyn Monroe or a Jane Mansfield or a Sophia Loren or any of the great gorgeous movie stars that we've known to come to love to see on the stage and on the screen, we're looking at one aspect of femininity always, and that is the sexuality and the sexual attraction for the male. And it's like this is a show that's being put on to entertain the male, and the men, or the woman-oriented women, if there's lesbians or think that way, I don't know, but from a heterosexual male point of view, there's a certain response that you feel and see when you have one of these iconic, sexually decked out women to look at. And That to me is one of the things that what people who consider themselves to be feminists most object to is the
Yeah,
objectification of the female as a sex object, as opposed to honoring the real nature of femininity, which, of course, the essence of female is life, is as you say. I mean, we worship the divine female because without the female, there's no babies, there's no future, there's nothing.
that's right.
So it's a big different way to use the term divine female, and
Right.
I
You're t-
want to have a clarity as to what we're talking about here.
Certainly, you're talking about one limited aspect of sexuality that Hollywood and the tabloids have always exploited, right? So obvious it sells tickets, right? And
Yeah.
and guys, typically we go for that immediate reaction, right? Visually. But if you cast sexuality in larger terms, like you're alluding to just now, cast it in larger terms of fertility, then that's what is being worshipped. Because what the so-called academic feminists don't want to acknowledge that is that Jane Mansfield, Marilyn Monroe, her biggest fans are women themselves. How do we account for that? They can say, oh, well, it's just false consciousness, or they've been programmed, or they're deluded, or they haven't taken any classes in women and gender studies here at the University of California, Davis yet. Then we'll straighten them out. But I think there's something deeper here. There is a primordial uh, I won't call it instinct, but a primordial urge to preserve the remnants of fertility in 2023. And we know it's under serious bioscientific, even biogenetic attack that can be quantified, it can be documented. So maybe this is the death throes. And the only person who is a feminist herself in academia that goes contrary to this really cliched academic argument is Camille Paglia. Sexual Persona was her first major book that goes against the grain of this, right? And she drives the other academic feminists crazy because her argument is counter to that. Because you know why? Her training is in the classics, right?
Hmm.
Including medieval Christian, but also pre-Christian classics. And she has a much deeper civilizational understanding, not a post-Freudian, really small swath of history there, but she has a much deeper longitudinal understanding of sexuality for Western Europe. Now, where she falls down and others falling down, this is where I'm trying to complete the project, is that there's something simultaneous, and this intersects with your interest recently in Ukraine versus Russia, the war there, right? There's a simultaneous movement in Mother Russia that has been taking place with mounting intensity since the fall of the Soviet Union, the breakup of the Soviet Union, since around 1991. And there's been a rediscovery of these people from the 1920s and 30s, the interwar period, before World War II. They're called the Russian cosmists. They were thinkers, physicists, writers, intellectuals, artists, politicians, poets. They influenced people like Dostoevsky, like Gorky, right? World historical literary figures. And that's why when we read Dostoevsky, we're infused with this spiritual feeling, even though it's about Dostoevsky, kind of like Jane Austen. It's about, courtship between one privileged man and one younger privileged woman. It has that Jane Austen deal, but underlying that is this real heavy metaphysical, Brothers Karamazov undertone there that comes from Mother Russia. So they rediscovered another book that's been formative in my understanding of what's really going on in the Russia-Ukraine war that's not being addressed, definitely not by mainstream media, definitely not by indie media, is the whole history of occult Russia.
Very important. I've
This
been looking some into that myself a bit, but I'm not familiar with this book you're holding.
This book just came out. For what it's worth, he's Christopher McIntosh is he's on YouTube too. He's very well spoken and gives great presentations. But I recommend this book. I don't agree with his conclusions. He strikes me as a quote unquote post-Christian neo-pagan romanticist who's over glorifying Russian cosmism and the Russian romantic tradition, right? There are limits to that, so far as I'm concerned. But it says here, he's a British-born writer and historian. He specializes in the esoteric traditions of the West, which needs to be done. That's why we're talking about Beltane here. He has a doctorate from Oxford. Okay, so we can't really dismiss him that easily as we can Gary Lachman or somebody else or some of these pundits on TubeView, right? He has a degree in German from London University. He could read Russian too. A lot of his citations are in Russian language. And he has a diploma from Russian. Now, here's a red flag. A diploma in Russian from the United Nations Language School. And he lives in the heart of neo-paganism, Lower Saxony, North Germany. He's British. So he might be from the intelligence world. I don't know. But he's an excellent scholar. And this is where the Pentagon, I mean, the people who are really sincere about trying to bring peace to that region need to understand the cultural forensics of the Russian people and the Ukrainian people and the people of the steppes, Central Asia, Trans Asia, right? But it'll help us understand where Alexander Julgin, right, supposedly Putin's brain, who used to teach at Moscow State University until he was kicked out. He's a traditionalist. He comes from the old tradition. Putin himself later, I mean, it's been a few years now, declares that his family is from the so-called old tradition, even under the Bolsheviks, even under Stalin, even under Khrushchev. So he is sympathetic to this efflorescence, this recovery of the beautiful Russian soul in 2023. And there's so much vitality going on there. NATO is going, oh my gosh, all the bullets, all the cannon shells, all the snipers in the world are not going to bring the Russian people to heal. So let's use one of our chess pieces, Ukraine, and one of the dupes there in the grand chessboard to at least see if we can have a holding action until we can find out how to really eliminate this. But it's not going to happen. They're dealing with Mother Russia. They have an illustrious civilizational preceding Alexander Nevsky, who turned back the Teutonic Knights, right? Preceding that it goes back to their Viking heritage. So they will never be vanquished because NATO has a boom, boom ideology. They're still living in the kinetic world, whereas most of the people worldwide are living in a metaphysical reality that cannot be conquered by bullets, nor by ballots, fake ballots. We are already accomplished, and we are already in tune with the cosmos. And I don't agree with everything that the cosmos, a lot of them inform, Russian science fiction and, of course, American science fiction. They were futurologists. All this was suppressed up until 1991 when the Soviet Union fell, which was ordained. It was predicted.
It was forced. It was forced by people like Brzezinski, and that of course is where we're stuck right now. Can we look at Putin as a leader of a sovereign country that is acting in its own interest, or is he still tied in with the Western financial system, and this is all just part of a big game to get rid of so many young men of fighting age, just throw them into the trenches like they did in World War I and World War II, burn up the youth, make sure you keep control over the culture and your money is safe. But to get those, what you mentioned about the I guess the Russian tradition of occult or deep, or maybe I think the word is esoteric or perhaps
Yeah.
Gnostic
Hmm.
power, the power that comes from having some secret knowledge or knowledge of a system like the Kabbalah, or
Hmm.
a system of understanding what's going to happen in the future, like Nostradamus or something
Hmm.
like that. This type of secret knowledge was that's where Blavatsky had her power, got her power from, was just the idea of we can communicate with the greater the astral forces. We can do seances. We can even use Ouija boards and talk to them. But that whole esoteric idea is the way that has been selected by the intelligence community and the Tavistock Institute and the
Hmm.
powers behind that to destroy Christianity.
Hmm.
And when you talk about a LaVey or Aquino and all of this the Church of Satan and all this stuff, um, it's obvious to me, and I suspect to most people, that this stuff didn't just pop out of somebody's mind one day. Say, I thought, wow, I think maybe Satan is really the person to worship here instead of Jesus. I think I'll just change everything and I'll go start my own church. No, there's power behind it.
Hmm.
The military behind Aquino, the power of the intelligence services, and certainly we have to look at Tavistock Institute for this, because that is the goal of the round table and the powers that are running things for the Rothschild banks and the Bank of England and all those people
Hmm.
that have been controlling us from behind the scenes for our entire lifetimes and generations before us. Those people are threatened by Christianity. They
Yeah.
don't like the idea of the golden rule being the way people treat each other. They would a whole lot rather have you scared that somebody's going to stab you in the back than have you go around thinking, well, I can trust my neighbor. I can trade my I can let him use my tractor and he'll give it back to me in good shape. I can trust my community. I can drink water out of the public fountain. All of
Hmm.
these basic ideas of community are based upon the 2,000 years of Christian civilization, where people learn to trust each other. Golden rule: I'll treat you as I would like you to treat me. And if that works, then all of the power behind the scenes falls. So that's why I think it's important that we study these Satanists and
Yeah.
realize that they are the devil. They are really acting to
Wow.
destroy the the likelihood of us having successful future generations and turning us back into uh, serfs.
Well, John, you just summarized in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I don't know what I was trying to say from the beginning. You just summarized what, because I'm in complete agreement with you.
Well, I think
Exactly.
it takes two of
But
us to get the words
however,
out.
I do not want us to fall into despair leading up
Right.
to Beltane 1. I want to bring a measure of hope. I want to bring some optimism. I don't think it's Pollyannish. This comes out of my study, and I'm a radically skeptical individual, but I still understand by reading the history that even the great Soviet Empire collapsed, right? Uh, we might be shocked one day when we turn on Fox News, which is Five Eyes, right? But they have to report some factual information. We might be shocked one day when we listen to Brett Baer saying, "Hey, there's been a revolution in the People's Republic of China. The Politburo is out. They're going to have democracy." And it took decades after Tiananmen Square, but the memory lived on. That is the reality of human civilization. Humanity, if I can speak in such grandiose terms, aspires to freedom, autonomy, sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yeah. These other systems,
Yes.
they are,
But we have to have
yeah. Go ahead.
The other systems are empires. They are it's just like the British. Right now, I consider myself to be a citizen of the United States. A citizen is somebody who has rights and responsibilities, but is not a subject.
Right.
The British have subjects. A subject is somebody that is completely under control of the government or the king or the empire. And I do not want to live as a subject. And I do not want the British Empire coming back in here and telling me what to do through through the AI processes of YouTube, which they try to do. They try to make me say what they want them to. It's doing it to you. They're doing it to hundreds and thousands of people. They're deplatforming us. I don't know if you like Tucker Carlson or not, but I don't think he should be deplatformed because of something that he said.
Mhm.
And I don't think anybody should be deplatformed. I think we should have free access to public media so that we could all uh, say what we think is true.
Right.
Or if we get up there and lie, then there'll be plenty of people to realize, hey, this guy's lying. That guy Fauci, nah, he's lying. Look, if we had free press, the whole thing wouldn't have happened.
Mhm.
Everybody, all the suspicious things from the whole PCR tests. Suddenly, over a weekend, somebody in Germany, this Dr. Christian Drosten, takes Carrie Mullis's PCR test that is not really a test, it's just an evaluation machine, and somehow magically tunes it up and makes it perfect to diagnose whether or not you have the what disease, the COVID.
Mhm.
And it was palpably impossible. How could you do that in a weekend? Yet everybody believed him. Everybody did because of the stature, of the medical, the lab coat mystique,
Mhm.
uh, just I will do what the great important medical doctors tell me. And now we are see that falling apart with Fauci. Um, that I think is a cultural disaster that we're
Mhm.
going to be facing, is that the people are going to lose faith in their medical system. And, perhaps it's time to get back to some homeopathy and some midwifery and some,
Yeah.
but having a personal care physician that really takes care of you
Now
as
that's
opposed,
where the pagans got it right. The
okay,
herbs, natural
yeah,
childbirth, rearing, and grow your own food, you know? I can
oh man,
understand the appeal of paganism, but discarding Christianity, as you articulated earlier, is not the solution. That's the road to perdition, because paganism is also dependent upon the continual replenishment of their society with blood sacrifice,
oh
and
yeah,
Christianity did away with that. I mean, after as horrid as it was, the conquistadors of Mexico, of the Aztecs, they had a lot of support from the neighboring tribes because they said, "We're going to end this sacrifice, child sacrifice." And not long after they got rid of Moctezuma, they had tens of thousands of converts of Indians. Thank you so much, because
mm.
now we're not in danger of being eaten anymore.
But
So there's
that
some.
existed everywhere. It existed in
Oh
Europe.
yeah, yeah, but which religion made it one of its priorities to say, no, this is not acceptable.
That's right.
This type of fire sacrifice and fire ritual and Baal, which goes back to Samaria, we're not
Yeah.
having that anymore. We're going to build on our humanity and thrive as a consequence. So this is the message that I'm going to bring as we lead up to this fateful Beltane May 1st of 2013, because people are going to be thrown into a panic when someone like Rhiannon mysteriously turns up dead. Not Rhiannon, that she was a witch made popular by Fleetwood Mac. Talk about Rihanna.
Oh, you don't want to. You're not jinxing her now, are you?
Not at all. I'm just, off the top of my head trying to determine who's on top right now. It's not going to be Madonna because she's aged out already, right?
Yeah, well, she was back in the news though recently. I don't know why.
But
You know,
no
my,
one's,
my idea of Beltane,
yeah.
just so you know,
Hmm.
is bonfires and naked women jumping over the fire, just running up and jumping through the fire. I'm
Hmm.
That ritual, I think, comes from the old uh, Celtic tradition, and
Right.
so I that idea of a young woman going through a transition, becoming uh, a woman or whatever you want to do. But if you think of that as a passage, a rite of passage to go through
Hmm.
that fire, then now what's different? Well, now you are free to go up the mountain with the young man and lay down in the bower and do what nature wants you to do. And
Right.
I think, that to me uh, is beautiful. It's
Yeah.
pagan. It's not necessarily Christian, not Christian at all, because they haven't been to a priest. And these,
Mhm.
but I guess,
Well, what I'm warning
we
against is
can't
not
condemn
paganism.
everything. We can't
What I'm
condemn
warning against
everything that was
is the
pagan.
neo-pagan appropriation of
Yeah.
what sounds really beautiful, nice, and romantic and idyllic. It's Edenic almost. I'm warning against the 60s Alice Bailey, who came out of Theosophy and what later became the New Age. And this engineering, you call it Tavistock. I think it's more Pentagon related these days. uh, and university, right? There's this woman, Catherine Olmsted at UC Davis in the history department, who has a mentions recently, who's anti-conspiracy. By the way, she was also heading the committee to investigate me. All right, so
Mhm.
she is a exorcist. She's a witch hunter. This is Catherine Olmsted talking about conspiracy theorists and pagan people who are engaged in all these sort of weird theories. Her job at UC Davis, because that's her specialty, right? Academic specialty is outing and defaming people who are identified as conspiracy theorists, and I
Mm.
was one of them. And so she headed a committee in order to put me into the Wicker Man. And once I was in the Wicker Man, she was going to be lighting the Wicker Man with a torch.
Mhm.
That's also part of the Celtic pagan lore, the sacrifice of a healthy young male in order to allow the fertility cults, the fertility to extend season to season to season.
It strikes me as a kind of a way for the powers that be to just kind of contemptibly tell everybody else that you belong to me and I can do anything I want, including take your firstborn son and throw him into a fire. And that to
Mhm.
me is the psychological control mechanism that seems to have worked for those primitive people,
Mhm.
because the Aztecs, the Incas, and the Druids in the Celtic and British world, they did things like that,
Mhm.
and it was, to me, I think, a power trip that kept them, people thinking, oh, these people have, not only are they powerful, they have secret knowledge. They know that doing this is actually good. And, I don't know how people could give their firstborn to a Moloch to be thrown into a fire, but certainly that happened and may well be happening in various forms today.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, by the same token, there have been archaeological excavations of these bogs that have finally sort of dried up, and they found the bones of people who are obviously nobility, and they had their skulls bashed in. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? So it's a two-way street. And that's one of the reasons why the nobility and the people in super privilege are really jealously guarding their privilege and their control over the society
Hmm.
because they know about what happens to kings. Their heads tend to roll periodically, whether it's the French Revolution or even within English history. We see it, the cycle going over and over. And that's really deeply impressed in their epigenetic memory. They do, Queen Elizabeth II did not want to be the one whose head was rolling. So she had to, throughout her entire career, try to placate the British public in a very important post-war transitional period to ensure that the legitimacy of their reign, that they were holding their end up, and they were able to at least last into the reign of the next monarch, which currently is the British King Charles. And the show that's being run in parallel between the British Prince Harry, and I always say British because he's not my prince and the British king is not my king. So I say it's their king. That's their system. The British Prince Harry has this show going on, sideshow, with the British Princess Meghan Markle in Montecito, California, Santa Barbara County. They're neighbors of Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres and the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. It's Rockefeller. That's really where it's happening in California, and it's all occultic, and it's all rooted into this academic occultism, ranging from policy into hard science and engineering, science, technology, engineering. I have this one book by Willis Harman out of Stanford, who began as an engineer, who was seeing what was going on in the counterculture against the technocracy, against 1984, against all the warnings that we were getting from different writers and social thinkers. And he absorbed that. And he said, well, what we're going to do in order to bring in the technocracy is to take off the hard edges from it and allow for countercultural innovations. We're going to allow tarot. We're going to even draw on our Freemasonic history in colonial America and saying, yeah, this is all part. We're not a harsh technocracy. We're a soft machine, to use the title from William Burroughs, later adopted by one of my favorite groups of all time, the British group Soft Machine. We're going to be a soft machine, not a hard machine. We were talking before the show about the Brotherhood of the Bell. The original title of the novel, who, by the way, was written by David Katz, who was an OSS guy. I think that's where he met all the white shoe boys who later went on to the CIA and got the secret of the Brotherhood of the Bell. But the original title was the Brotherhood of Velvet. So okay, you were going to have the velvet pathway laid out for yourself. This is the promise of every immigrant conservative empire that comes to America, or every aspirational, every wannabe in America. They want that velvet. But what they don't realize is that there's an iron fist in the velvet glove, and that glove is going to hit them in the head sooner or later. That's the Brotherhood of the Bell, Glenn Ford. Yeah. 1970.
That's a funny coincidence, because I was thinking about that, and you mentioned we were talking before the show, guys, about some of the early esoteric stuff that I was looking into, and one of them, of course, was Die Glocke, which Professor Hamamoto reminded me of, and that triggered, the realization, if you know what the Die Glocke legend is, it might even be true. Is this bell-shaped thing, a very large and heavy scientific instrument that they use to create levitation. And this, the ideas behind it are pretty interesting, and I've studied through it, and I thought, wow, you know what, that really could work. Maybe they are doing that, maybe that is what UFOs are. But anyway, Die Glocke, shaped like a bell, means bell in English. And so the Brotherhood of the Bell, when I saw that movie, I saw a snatch of something that said it on it. And I've always liked Glenn Ford. So I said, I got to see this. So I looked at it, and I didn't really watch the whole thing. It was a little bit dreary, but the parts where he goes through an initiation, he goes into that, paneled room with the leather chairs, and they do the stand in the circle and they say their whatever they said. But you can see that he's becoming a member of a secret society. And that idea of becoming a member of a secret society that has secret knowledge, this is the Gnostic power that exists. It has existed before Christianity.
Mhm.
Religions that come from Egypt and Babylon and these old religions. And you're right, it is a lot about fertility, and it's a lot about the cycle of life and the cycle of the years. And the man's role, really, this is the Osiris role in that Gnostic universe, is to fight, to be a knight when necessary, to fight,
Mhm.
to procreate, to leave that one child behind. That dream of being uh, a productive member of something that's much bigger than himself. And so
Absolutely.
he consents to the idea of, I'm going to die at some point in the service of this thing, this civilization or this religion or whatever it is. And that is an acceptance that he has that makes him subservient to the powers that be for his whole life. But he feels like he's done his duty because he is that Osiris character. And, if you drive through the country and see people with those obelisks on their graves, they died doing what they thought was their duty as that person. And it's not a Christian attitude. It is a Gnostic attitude of, yes, I'm just a piece of flesh, and I'm going to be gone, but I'm going to do my duty while I'm here. And that, of course, that generates that's a soldierly attitude. That's the kind of a religion that you would want to spread if you were a king or an emperor that needed your soldiers to go to war, because then they wouldn't mind, going and storming the fortress, and with the odds of surviving pretty slim, but you're doing it for your emperor, and that's why you're here. That association of a civilization around these ancient ideas of secret knowledge, that I do what they tell me because they know more than I do. They are almost like gods on earth, so I submit my will to them. They love it. They absolutely love it. This and that, of course, is the opposite of the golden rule, and the opposite of what I hope we are still taught in our uh, kindergartens and in our Sunday schools and wherever the kids acquire whatever they do know now about morality and how to treat one another in this world.
Well, John, I have a small channel. I have just a small number of subscribers, but they're really quality. And one of the comments made was that, hey, did you know that Glenn Ford was a Freemason? So that got me interested in it. So what I found out that Glenn Ford is not his name. His given name was Gwilyn. So he came from the Celtic bloodlines. His name was Gwilyn Samuel Newton, then Glenn Ford. It was changed by the movie. He was under contract to make it more palatable, right? So he is a Celt. And I started looking into it. He's from Quebec originally. They migrated down to Los Angeles and got into the movies. And he was a U.S. Marine and decorated. He also did some work with the French Foreign Legion during the Vietnam War. So I think he had some kind of sûreté or intelligence type connection like Anthony Bourdain's dad did, which allowed Anthony Bourdain to become, um, Mr. Chef, right? Replacing Julia Child, who herself was an OSS person. So Gwilyn Ford, I'm kind of putting out this hypothesis that he was a direct descendant of Prince Henry Sinclair, right? And most of your viewers know about that whole, situation with Knights Templar and how they even got to Scotland and how they came to the New World long before Cristobal Colombo, otherwise known as Christopher Columbus. As we learned in grade school, we didn't learn about no Knights Templar, did we? But Glenn Ford's people were here and they had the treasure. They had the Templar gold. And the reason why Glenn Ford was in all these Westerns that you and me, we grew up with that stuff in the 50s, watching it on TV in our pajamas. That's Glenn Ford. But he was Canadian. But he was a cowboy who was protecting the Templar gold that's buried somewhere in the far west of America. New Mexico, maybe Nevada, Arizona. Anyway, we can go on with that. I hope some other people will follow up on this very, very important lead about Gwilyn Ford, Knights Templar. We're not talking about abstractions here, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about ancient history. We're talking about 2023. And we're talking about the survival of the American Republic. And the only way that's going to happen is if we go ancient. We're going to go back to, Samaria and Babylon, and we're going to go to the medieval, and we're going to migrate up to the British Isles, and we're going to talk about the history of the Norsemen, and we're also going to talk about their early contact with China and what is now Japan. Japan was sending emissaries to the Vatican in like 1540, regularly. That's not in the history books, right? The Dutch East Indies. Why did they even bother with America? Because they were trying to get to the East Indies. That was their chief object of plunder. And that's how we eventually wound up, the United States, trying to colonize in place of the French Empire, the British Empire, Southeast Asia. They tried to, the Templars tried to take over Japan as early as the 16th century, and they were repulsed and they were segregated in Nagasaki in a small island called Dejima. Those were the Scottish Templars who were trying to do it. And they surreptitiously imported arms, guns, and created the war capacity for this country to hopefully kill itself in civil war, another auto-genocide like the American Civil War. But instead, what happened was they built a very strong central state that was powerful by the turn of the century to take on the Russian Empire in the
With a little
Russo-Japanese,
help.
and then later on in World War II, the Civil War. Yeah. So this is.
I was just going to say, with a little help from Winston Churchill and the British government, they're egging Japan on.
And they were investing in the warship. They were selling the bonds and financing that the buildup of the Japanese Imperial Navy, which decades later, your father had to go up against in the Pacific Theater. Next to General MacArthur, who the Navy people referred to as Admiral MacArthur because he thought he ran his own.
Well, he had his own Navy,
Yeah.
He did. It was MacArthur's Navy, and
Yeah.
my father was a member of MacArthur's Navy and was on his flagship. Quite a amazing story that I've.
Yeah. Well, you memorialize it in a book. So again, ladies and gentlemen, when we're discussing this, it really literally hits home. It involves each and every one of us if you look at it from within a proper framework.
And you can latch on to an awful lot of these strings and pull on them and get to some very fruitful information. The idea of Templars in the country early, before the Republic, before the English even, is real. I've seen evidence of it. I've seen that Portugal, actually, remember Prince Henry the Navigator and the Portuguese that were sending ships down to Africa? Well, there were some of them in the Americas very early on, and they were actually Knights Templar going out into Texas and Arizona and what we call, the Southwest now. And, do they have a secret treasure? I don't know. That secret treasure might be gold, but it also might just be some secret knowledge that may be useful in controlling the population. But we do, I think, have a lot of power when we recognize what's going on. And we see that these systems of control by kings and empires have it in common that you have to give up your sense of self identity and sacrifice yourself to the will of the state, whether it's the communist state or the empire or whatever the form of the state is. You have left the idea of being a citizen in a republic and entered the world of being a subject in an empire that owns your body, owns your soul, owns every single part of you. And that is where Christianity, I think, is the great hope, that we can, and all the Abrahamic religions, I think, have this hope in them. It's not just
Mhm.
Christianity, but just speaking as an American, that's the main religion we express that through here. But the religions that recognize the value of personal integrity, doing what you say you're going to do, not lying, not stabbing people in the back, and holding yourself responsible and saying you're sorry if you did something that you didn't, that hurt somebody, taking responsibility. These things they don't want to do. They want to be able to stab you in the back and walk away and just pretend they never knew you. And that is the way they amass their fortune. But by exposing it, and by saying there is a better way, and it is the way that we've been taught as children, and we shouldn't abandon that for some sexy idea of oh, I'm going to go to the satanic church and we're going to have an orgy, it's going to be great. I mean, have an orgy, and but do it voluntarily with friends. Don't go to some crazy nutcase and do what he says, because you'll end up drinking that poison and or that potion and end up in a wicker chair one day, which is not where we want to end up. We are humans. We have a mission to improve our lives, and to save this wonderful creation that if we attribute it to God, or if we don't, it's still a wonderful, amazing creation, and we'd be crazy to allow it to get destroyed. And so that's my message. How about you, Professor?
John, I couldn't express it any better than that as we run up to Beltane 2013. We need those words, and we need
2023. How about that?
I'm
Let's
sorry,
let's
I lost a decade. Um,
That's
but yeah,
okay.
we need your yeoman's work at the helm here, just plugging away at the truth. I mean, we have people like Ezra Pound and then Eustace Mullins, who dug that information out that we're able to use now. In fact, it was through Eustace Mullins that I first found out about the Brotherhood of the Bell movie. And of
Oh, is that
course, through them comes the Schiller Institute, it was influenced by them, and the Executive Intelligence Review, the LaRouche people. So there's that whole genealogy of public intellectual discourse that we have to draw from, and you're doing a great job in disseminating it, because this is not new. This is information that goes back to people like the great American patriot, not the fascist, as I was taught in college, Ezra Pound, who is in the nut house, the bug house, close by to you, St. Elizabeth's.
That's right. He was in St. Elizabeth's and being visited by Eustace Mullins, who at
Right.
the time was working at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. But St. Elizabeth's Hospital sits on a hill just on the southeast corner of Washington, D.C., above the Anacostia River, in one of the most beautiful spots in the District of Columbia. But recently, well, past 15 years, they started building this horrible headquarters for the Department of Health, what is it? Heimatsicherheitsdienst. What's that in English?
Health and
Homeland
Human Service.
Security.
Oh, okay.
Department of Homeland Security. I always call it the Department of Heimatsicherheitsdienst.
Yes.
Because it's a fascist Nazi, and it looks like the headquarters of GHQ in London. It's all just
Oh,
steel
no.
and glass and brick and steel and corners, and it's the ugliest architecture you can imagine.
It's
And it's right there.
Neo-Babylonian, huh?
Yeah, and it's taken up. They just took down all these trees, and just one of the most beautiful parts of Washington, because it was, St. Elizabeth's was a large campus, and it
Mhm.
still is there. There's still some lovely old red brick buildings like that are there, but it's to put that just monstrosity there on the hill. It's creepy, but that's where we're going. We're going in that direction, and I'm telling you, it's not the direction that we want to go as a nation. We've got to put on the brakes and get back on track where we should be. All right, Professor, thanks again for another lovely evening. And I wish we had more time. On the other hand, it's 9 o'clock here on the East Coast, and I think it's time for me to call it a night. So
Thank you,
thank you
John.
very much again, Professor, and look forward to talking to you again soon. And all the best with your work on Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan and exposing, and I hope that you have a happy Beltane.
Okay. I think we're all going to survive it now that we have the foreknowledge.
There you go. That's
Mm.
right. All right. So thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night. Thanks, Professor.